I want to talk about this potential for nuclear confrontation with Russia, because it seems like every single move that the collective West is making now toward Russia points in a nuclear direction. So, of course, you've had all of the talks of F-16s. And if you've ever heard Scott Ritter on my program or on other programs, the folks at the Duran, all the people that have been covering this militarily, they'll say, well, F-16s have a nuclear capacity because they can carry nuclear weapons. You've also had Sweden's admission into NATO, as well as just so many other escalations of late that point to an increased nuclear capacity against Russia. And Russia has, of course, sounded the alarm rightfully. And so today there have been reports, and today is July, I almost said June. Today is July 17th. And over the last 24 hours, we've had more attacks on Crimea. So you may have remembered several months ago, over half a year ago now, I believe, there were attacks on the bridge, the Crimea bridge, as it's known. And now it seems like there are more attacks from the Ukrainian side on this region. And so for those of you who don't know, Crimea is particularly important because it is if Ukraine joining NATO was Russia's red line, right? If Ukraine joining NATO was Russia's red line, one of them, then Crimea is another huge red line for Russia, maybe even bigger, because in 2014-15, during the Maidan coup, during all of the violence and the riots that the US and NATO supported, Russia stepped in and said, we're going to protect the Russians who live there. They also have military installations there. There's also hundreds of years of history of Crimea being part of Russia. So we're going to protect this region. We're going to hold a referendum and allow people in Crimea to decide if they want to join Russia. And they did, overwhelmingly. Over 94.5% of people voted in to join the Russian Federation. And ever since then, Ukraine's government has been speaking about taking it back. And those words have become even more cacophonous as the conflict has escalated. And of course, as I said, this bridge, this region has already been attacked by Ukrainian terrorists. Now it has been attacked again, and this time civilians have died. I believe it has been 2 people and an injured child that have been the casualties of another Ukrainian attack. And so here is the report. The Crimean bridge has been attacked by a Ukrainian terrorist drone attack, Russia's National Anti-Terrorist Committee announced on Monday. In a statement, the NAK said that the key link between the Crimean Peninsula and the mainland Russia was attacked by 2 Ukrainian unmanned sea vehicles around 3 a.m. local time. The terrorist act resulted in the road component of the Crimean Peninsula and mainland Russia attacked by 2 Ukrainian unmanned sea vehicles. I already read that. The terrorist attack resulted in the road component of the Crimean bridge sustaining damage. 2 adults were killed and 1 child was injured, it stated, adding that law enforcement agencies are investigating the matter. The statement comes after several Ukrainian media outlets described the attack as a special operation conducted by the country's security services and naval forces. Publicly, however, Ukrainian officials stopped short of assuming direct responsibility while cheering the incident. Now, this is the same situation as before when the bridge was attacked. The fatalities were first reported by Belgrade Governor Vyacheslav Gladkov, who said that those who died were a married couple from his region, adding that their daughter had been injured. So essentially, the parents of this child were killed by Ukrainians. Following the raid, Russian authorities stopped traffic from crossing the bridge, although several hours later, train service from the undamaged section resumed. Ukraine has attempted to target the bridge in the past. Last week, Kiev's forces launched a missile attack at a key link, but failed to break through Russia's air defenses. In October 2022, this is what I was talking about, so over 6 months ago, the bridge was damaged in a deadly truck bombing that Russia said was orchestrated by Ukrainian intelligence services, and at the time, Moscow responded by intensifying missile strikes. So we can probably guarantee that that is going to happen again, that there will be increased retaliation for this, and rightfully so, because this is another intense provocation that did lead to casualties. It led to the deaths, and this is a really sad situation. It led to the deaths of the parents of a child who also happens to be injured. So this is what's been going on. And I'm going to read you how the Financial Times reported on it. And I like to read the Financial Times because they give you a more, I would say, if you look in the realm of objective and subjective, they give you both the objective report as well as the subjective, how should I say, bravado of the collective West and all of their criminality. So here is what they said. So Russia halts traffic over Crimea Bridge after reports of an explosion. So Moscow installed authorities. So there you go. So this is the difference. This is what we get to ingest about the conflict. Moscow installed authorities in Crimea have halted traffic on the bridge connecting the occupied peninsula to Russia after reports of an explosion that caused parts of it to collapse, killing 2 people early Monday. So they're saying Moscow installed this leadership in Crimea, but the reality is that this was a referendum and people chose. Now, if people didn't want to have this, if the people of Crimea didn't want Russia to be their governing body, they didn't want to be a part of the Russian Federation, why would they accept an imposed government? What in what interest would it be for them if certainly Ukraine was offering a better deal? Of course, the answer is Ukraine is not offering a better deal. If Ukraine was in charge, well, Crimea would look a lot more like Donetsk and Lugansk and experience the kinds of shelling that those regions of East Ukraine have, or formerly East Ukraine, have experienced since 2014. So if confirmed to be a second Ukrainian attack on the bridge opened with great fanfare by Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2018, it would deal another humiliating blow to the Kremlin's prestige and possibly its ability to supply troops occupying Ukraine's southern region. So there you go. This is how the collective West thinks. They think that these attacks are a humiliating blow to Russia rather than a disastrous, disgusting war crime that definitely has the thumbprints and fingerprints of Ukraine on it. And if the Ukraine's thumbprints are on it, you better believe the collective West's thumbprints and fingerprints are on it. So the governor of Russia's Belgorod region, which borders Ukraine, said a man and a woman from the region had been killed in the explosion. Their 14-year-old daughter was in the hospital in stable conditions. So, I mean, how disgusting is this? So it's humiliating for Russia that people had to die because of Ukrainian attacks. No criticisms of Ukraine attacking the bridge, of course. MASH, an online news outlet with close ties to Russia's police, posted videos showing that this one span on the bridge had collapsed and another had begun to sink into the waters of the Kerch Strait. It said investigators had found traces of jet skis near the sites and the explosion and claimed that Ukraine had begun to use them as explosive carrying underwater drones. I wonder what else might have happened, for example, Nord Stream with explosives. So the bridge was also previously damaged in an attack in October that forced Russian authorities to close it temporarily. Ukraine didn't immediately take credit for that strike, though last week Deputy Defense Minister called it the first blow on the Crimean bridge to break the logistics of the Russians. Russian authorities did not say how badly the bridge was damaged on Monday's attacks, but claimed the railway tracks had not been harmed in the blast and promised traffic would soon resume. So, you know, the damage is likely minimal. This happened before. This time, though, people died. At least people, civilians had to die, and that's really truly unfortunate. It's a crime. It's a crime that the collective West and its media, like here, is completely okay with. On social media app Telegram, several videos appeared to show the blast before sunrise, while others showed smoke rising from the bridge. A crushed vehicle and cars backed up for kilometers nearby. Ukrainian officials did not take responsibility for the explosion, but several top officials and Ukraine's security service gloated on social media, while Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to Ukraine's President Zelensky, reiterated Kiev's position that the bridge was a legitimate military target. So all the while they're saying, well, we didn't do it officially. We're not. Of course, they're not going to say they did it officially because that is a war crime, and that would look incredibly bad for the U.S. and NATO to be supporting such acts. But Ukraine still talks about civilian infrastructure as legitimate military targets, while also claiming that Russia is striking civilian infrastructure and that somehow that is a terrible thing that Russia is doing. Mind you, if anyone's been following this conflict closely from Mariupol to, Kiev, wherever there has been fighting, well, where does Ukraine station its weaponry? Where does it station its flashpoints for fighting? It usually tends to be, they evacuate hospitals, they evacuate civilian infrastructure. And what did Russia say it was going to do? It's going to demilitarize Ukraine. So if Ukraine is going to put their infrastructure in hospitals, Russia might blow those hospitals up. And it's the responsibility, it's Kiev's responsibility to protect civilians in a war, not Russia's. Russia, I think, is actually doing that, but it's not Russia's responsibility to fight the war for Ukraine. Ukraine is choosing to fight in a certain way, and they're admitting it here. They're admitting that they are going to target this bridge. It's a legitimate military target. Well, I think people are using this bridge, ordinary people who are doing business, people who are traveling, people who are trying to connect from Crimea to the other parts of Russia. That is a war crime, and it's not being talked about like that. So here's what Podolyak wrote on Twitter. He said, any illegal structures use illegal structures. See, the bridge is illegal. To deliver Russian instruments of mass murder are necessarily short-lived, regardless of the reasons for destruction. So they're saying that it's simply a bridge used for weapons. That's not true. This bridge is mainly commercial, mainly for social, cultural purposes. But of course, Russia is at war now, so it's also going to have a military purpose. Just like any other country at war, a lot of civilian infrastructure will be used for those purposes. But so Yusov Andrei, a representative of Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, declined to comment when asked by Ukraine's public broadcaster if Kiev was behind the attack, but he said it could hinder Russian logistics. Any logistical problems are additional complications for the occupiers, which create potential advantages for Ukraine's defense forces. So the bridge is a crucial link between Russia and occupied Ukrainian territories and is used to transport troops, tanks, and other military supplies for the Kremlin's invasion fighting in southern Ukraine. The other supply routes through the land bridge that Moscow created by blah, 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 invading and occupying southern Ukraine. So this is what you get. You get Russia invaded. Russia's doing terrible things. So that means it's okay to target bridges and to target infrastructure that is not primarily only used for the war. I mean, this bridge is used for commercial purposes. I believe last time some of the biggest most devastation was caused by I believe they detonated explosives on a commercial vehicle, a commercial truck. So this is escalating things to the point, right? Here you go. Russian holiday makers. Look at this. Russian holiday makers have continued to flock to Crimea, a popular vacation destination, even as the peninsula has become a target for air and drone strikes during the war. So that's an admission. All across the collective West media, you will see these admissions that, it's a military target. This is what Ukraine's government say. This is the reality. And this is why you have these escalations becoming more and more dangerous. It's absolutely just, in my estimation, out of this, it should not be happening. But Ukraine is so desperate right now. The counteroffensive has failed. You see it across the media. If you read any report, read the New York Times, read CNN, read anywhere. Every U.S. official is calling this a stalemate right now. And if U.S. officials are calling things stalemates, you better believe that it's worse than that, because the United States, the collective West, they are spin artists and they understand the importance of public relations. So if the U.S., NATO countries, if they're saying there's a stalemate in Ukraine, that means it is worse than a stalemate for Ukraine, that they're losing. And so they're lashing out at Crimea. They're trying to conduct what are ineffective operations that only cause damage and harm to civilians. And the collective West media, you can depend on them to justify it. So all of this leads to, as I said in the beginning, this leads to a possible nuclear confrontation, not one that is going to happen tomorrow, but one where the building blocks are consistently being laid for it. Because everything from continue to militarize Ukraine, continue to prolong the conflict, continue to move up the conflict escalator, even if it is haphazard, ineffective, even if the deliveries don't come rapidly. Even so, all of it points, admitting Sweden into NATO, Finland into NATO, all of that leads to a conflict escalator toward nuclear conflict. And so now I'm going to play you what Scott Ritter had to say about NATO's nuclear shenanigans, because I think it's important here. And this is from his 2-minute topic. I just wanted to play you this because I think it's a good summary of some other key points of this escalating conflict toward a nuclear confrontation. That's where this will be headed if there isn't really what I think needs to happen. If there isn't an arrested situation for the collective West, if they aren't arrested, if they aren't stopped, maybe Russia has the ability to stop them. However, Russia on its own, I don't think will be stopping, and it has the influence over the absolutely sociopathic interests of the neocon foreign policy establishment and all of the powerful economic and political interests that back them. So that's why you've had the more success Russia has on the battlefield, the more unhinged these forces become. That is where the danger really lies, in my estimation. But let's hear what Mr. Ritter, friend of the show, had to say about NATO's nuclear threat. Oh, I think I have it on mute. Sorry about that.
Nuclear nonsense. What's going on with NATO nuclear weapons? Prior to the Vilnius summit, which took place between July 11th and 12th, Poland had sent in a request asking to become part of the NATO nuclear sharing agreement. Basically, Poland wanted the United States to store B-61 thermonuclear weapons on Polish soil so that these weapons could be turned over to the Polish Air Force at a time of conflict and be used to strike Russian targets. Now, Poland has made this kind of request in the past, and it has rightly been pushed aside as nonsensical, escalatory in nature. This time, that didn't happen. Instead, what we have is NATO talking about the need to diversify, to strengthen its nuclear deterrent by spreading responsibility for the nuclear deterrent amongst other nations. This doesn't mean that NATO is going to redistribute the nuclear weapons. What it does mean is that NATO members who are going to acquire aircraft that are deemed to be nuclear capable, such as the F-35A or the modern versions of the F-16, that they will be brought into the nuclear sharing arrangement, meaning their aircraft will be stationed on the soil of nations that do have nuclear bombs, and these nuclear bombs could be loaded up on these aircraft and used in a time of conflict. This is a dangerous escalation. What it means is any country that possesses a nuclear capable aircraft, such as the F-35, must be viewed as a potentially hostile actor every time that aircraft takes off from the ground, because Russia won't know whether or not there's a nuclear bomb attached to it. This is why Russia has expressed some concern, legitimate concern, about the provision of F-16 aircraft to Ukraine. The F-16 is a nuclear capable aircraft, and if operated from Ukrainian soil, Russia must assume that that aircraft could be carrying a nuclear weapon. This is a dangerous escalation, one that NATO shouldn't be making at this time when there is a direct conflict between Russia and NATO.
I mean, there you have it. So that's that. I mean, that sums it up. That this is what NATO always does. This is what the United States does, and this is how they've been conducting warfare for several years, over a decade now, since the rise of Russia, since this shift to great power confrontation with Russia and China, is they have been militarily encircling NATO. Has been NATO countries, the U.S. especially, has been militarily encircling Russia and China, and depending on these vassal states, these puppet states, to basically do their bidding. And that is why Ukraine is such a threat to Russia. People ask, why would Russia have to invade? Was it really necessary? And when you think about it, if Ukraine were to join NATO, which since 2008, there's every indication that the U.S. was attempting, that is a possible nuclear confrontation at your border. And so it was bad enough that Latvia, Estonia, these countries that border Russia, a part of the former Soviet Union, just like Ukraine was, already are in NATO and already have this capacity to basically be given these kind of fighter jets, which then could load on nuclear weapons, which then could be used against Russia. Bad enough. Then you add Ukraine to the mix with the cultural connections, with the social connections, and with a much longer border. You think about that, and it just gets even worse. So there is a real nuclear threat, and it's NATO that is the threat. It is not Russia. We've even had a debate inside of Russia among Russian academics talking about, should Russia do a preemptive strike? If it's gone to that point where that debate is legitimately happening, then the danger of nuclear confrontation is actually much higher than, and we've, you have the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and they talk about their, minutes to midnight clock and all of that. But I think in real terms, if we're talking about real terms and who is responsible for these dangerous escalations, it's so clear that it's NATO expanding nuclear sharing, attempting to admit Ukraine, and also backing these reckless attacks, reckless on Crimea and on Russian territory, getting closer and closer to Russian territory and satisfying corrupt, just, we have to be honest, fascistic regimes like which exists in Poland, backing those kind of regimes and their narrow aims just to attack Russia. All of that leads to this soup, this dangerous soup of conditions that could very well lead to a nuclear conflict. And I truly believe that everything Russia has done, and people will say, you're a Putin puppet, you're pro-Russia, all of this. They don't want to look at the facts. The fact is that Russia's done everything to try to prevent such a situation. It wasn't Russia that tore up the INF Treaty. It wasn't Russia that militarily encircled itself. It wasn't Russia that has attempted to admit Ukraine into NATO and successfully admit Sweden, Finland, and these countries into NATO. That wasn't Russia. Russia has kept a nuclear arsenal because the Wolowitz Doctrine came out right after the Soviet Union fell. How could Russia work with the collective West on something like denuclearization if the collective West is plotting its destruction, even after essentially Russia was destroyed in many ways after the fall of the Soviet Union? And it just so happens that at the beginning of the year 2000, things started to turn around. But for those 9 years or so, it was a dark period. And even then, the U.S. and NATO were plotting to dismember Russia further in order to prevent, that's the Paul Wolowitz, the top neocon who has served many different purposes within the United States government, national security, state. Paul Wolowitz wrote this doctrine out of the spirit of a general trend that said, okay, the Soviet Union may be gone, but we're never going to allow Russia to have that kind of strength ever again. And oh, guess what? We see China rising out there to the east too. We're going to employ this doctrine as best as we can, even if it's a lot harder and possibly a lot more perilous for us. Well, Satan's sandwich has come in two for the collective West, because everything that the U.S. and NATO and the EU, etc., has done toward Russia and China has come back to them, has blown back in their face in many ways, especially economically, but also militarily. Militarily, I believe a lot of these desperate acts with Crimea and with admitting Sweden, all of this is desperation out of the fact that Joe Biden has said it. Joe Biden said, what did he say? He said they're out of ammunition. They don't really have much left to give to Ukraine. They're giving cluster bombs now, extremely destructive, but probably ineffective in the kind of fight that we are currently experiencing. On that, in that zone, in that territory of fighting across that defensive line, offensive line. So, they're running out of options. NATO is running out of options. And as I say often on this program, well, that situation is favorable to Russia when NATO and the U.S. as the snake, as the head of that snake, when they're out of options, they tend to get more dangerous. They tend to get more provocative. They tend to do things that perhaps, I guess they're never rational, but more rational periods of time would maybe preclude or maybe stop. But now we're seeing with this Crimea bridge attack, and the way, I think you have to pay attention to the way the collective West in its media frame all of this. What they do is they cover it in such a way where they normalize it. And when it's normalized, then they can do even more damage later when the opportunity, or maybe not even opportunity, just the moment arises. Because I don't really know if there are any opportunities to change the course of this conflict unless NATO wants to push that nuclear button now. I just don't see any way that this conflict changes unless that nuclear button is pushed. It's just not going to happen. Russia has defeated the counteroffensive. These terrorist attacks against Crimea, they're basically ineffectual. The cluster bombs aren't going to do much either. And so what you have is no peace negotiations, no attempts to settle this conflict on the U.S. and NATO side. What you have are all intensive purpose, all of these attempts, everything is thrown at the wind to try to salvage and prolong this conflict. That's why you also have all kinds of attempts to win Turkey over, right? You see the ways in which the U.S. and European countries are trying to curry favor with Erdogan, and in some respects it has worked, but in other respects it is actually failing quite badly because the U.S. and Europe, they dangle, right, F-16s, they dangle EU membership, and then they say, no, actually never. Turkey will never be treated as a dignified state by the NATO albatross. It never will be. And so no matter how much Erdogan wants to pander and play, never will be. It's all strategy for him. It's all realpolitik for him. And even if it has some short-term benefit and gain, the long-term, medium-term, Turkey is going to be a second-class NATO country and one that will never be embraced by the whole of the collective West. So all of these contradictions lead to a situation where, yeah, there is no prospect for peace right now, in my assessment. None. The only prospect for peace is Russia continuing forward and making the conflict untenable for NATO and the collective West to move forward. And that to me is a possibility. But how NATO, how the US reacts to that untenability, that inability to move further, I don't think is predictable. I don't think it can be predicted that I don't think it can be predicted that NATO and the U.S. will do the right thing. I don't think anything in its track record says that, yes, eventually there will be peace. Peace will have to be forced upon them. And I think there will be discussions of which direction do we go in? Do we push the red button? As sometimes you see the memes of the sweating, he's sweating, the guy is sweating, wondering whether to press the right button. I think that there will be some neocons that do have that inkling. Everything that happens in this conflict points in that direction. However, you do that and it's all over. And I think that there are many forces that want to see this continue. They want to see this go on permanently. They don't want to see their big cash cow end. They don't want to see the privileges that they have attempted to accumulate, and they have successfully accumulated, especially in government contracts, military contracts from Europe, from the US. They don't want to see those go away because that will all go away in such a nuclear conflict. But this is where you have a situation of every policy that is pursued by NATO and the collective West leads more in that nuclear direction, But in order to continue that cash cow flowing, in order to keep milking it, you have to continue on that direction. So it truly is one of these moments of history where the empire is at a dead end. Crimea is a dead end. The whole entirety of the Ukraine conflict is a dead end. There is no salvaging the dominance of the collective West. And that is what the danger of nuclear confrontation tells us, and why we need to continue to report not just the news, not just, oh, it's sad. A teenage girl, a teenage person just lost their parents because Ukraine, working at the behest of NATO, wants to do the unthinkable, which is encroach on Russian territory and try to win that battle, which it can't. But if you can't win that battle, then what you're leading everyone involved, NATO, into an existential conflict, which this conflict has always been for the collective West. Anyway, it always has been. And so that's where the danger of nuclear conflict lies, is in order to keep the cash cow flowing, in order to keep the profits going, in order to keep this permanent war going, the policies inevitably lead toward a nuclear direction, and it will be up to people. It won't be up to the neocons, the elites. It won't be up to them. They are going to decide the wrong thing. They are going to make the incorrect decision, at least with concern for the future of humanity. They only care about their short-term, narrow, private interests, the interests they see as being particularly significant, the profits, the hegemony, the dominance, as well as the status, right? The prominence, all of that factors in. They do not want to see Russia survive this. They will do anything to destroy Russia. And so that's why we have to speak of. That's what makes this channel, that's what makes people who really speak the truth about this conflict different. Doesn't matter to me or anything. Russia could have a completely different social system, one by far more corrupt than what goes on in the Russian Federation. I would be saying the same thing, because what matters most here is that the collective West's plot, its agenda, is arrested, because no one is going to survive the end game for where they are leading us. Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.